Okay, welcome to lesson 2. This is all about researching stories. Now, you should have a worksheet attached to Google Classroom. It's all about Peng Man. He's a brand new rapper that you might have heard of, and his bars are bear sick. Yeah, I'm cringing now as well. Sorry. So we're going to look at researching stories today, but what I want to do is to start off with a nice video. There's so much horrible stuff we're seeing on the news at the moment and things going around. Let's look at whether it should always be negative news we see, or maybe we should look for more upbeat and happy stories. So let's watch this.
Real newspaper, which some people don't realise. It's a real 32-page newspaper, and it comes out quarterly, and it's basically a platform to share all the good things happening in the world, things that we don't necessarily hear about. There's feel-good stories, but also real positive changes that are happening in the world that we might not hear about as well. Two things that I noticed were impacting my mental health in a negative way were the news and social media. I think it was a sort of bombardment of that. I just thought, if there's something I can do to sort of shift this slightly and just turn it on its head a little bit. I realised it wasn't just me, and thought, well, if I can do this, and it was a bit of a novelty thing to start with. It wasn't supposed to be, I wasn't expecting all of this. It was trying to find the good in humanity and the good in people in really awful times. And then as I started to look for more positive news, I was finding all these things that I thought I wouldn't know about. These things we're not seeing, these incredible acts of kindness and positive changes in the world and stuff like that. So, I thought I'll do this first issue, and then everyone will realise that there is still good left in the world. And then obviously, as soon as people had the first issue, they were like, can't wait for the second issue. And I was like, oh my god, I'm doing a second issue. I've sort of thought, I can't put a happy newspaper out now, like when this has happened, and sort of come in like, no, don't worry everyone, everything's sunshine and rainbows, because it's obviously not. So I always acknowledge those things. Around Manchester, we had a teacher from one of the schools there who messaged and said, please can we get some happy newspapers, because the children are all distraught because they'd lost some of the students. And actually more recently we had a teacher from the Christchurch school in New Zealand who messaged and said, the children are incredible and so strong, but we're all just in, like, we don't know what to do, and we want to cover the walls in happy news stories, stuff like that. That is why I'm doing it. Well, yeah. From the real newspaper. It's like an unwritten rule that people pass it on to like their neighbour or their grandma, or leave it in like a doctor's waiting room or something. The amazing thing with newspapers is the more subscribers and things you get, and wholesale orders lower the price of obviously printing the newspaper, which therefore means we can lower the cost for schools and hospitals and places that I think need
it. Okay, so we know There is lots of negativity at the moment. We know that a lot of people are feeling quite scared and quite vulnerable because of the coronavirus. But there is some really positive things that are out there. There's lots of happy news stories still to be found. And also, because of the coronavirus, many more people are becoming more helpful, are volunteering for stuff, are looking at helping people in need, are finding new ways of learning. They're doing lots of really positive stuff. So what I'd like you to do now is pause the video, and I'd like you to go and have a look at different websites. So the BBC website, you could have a look at the Metro newspaper website. Make sure it's Metro News in the UK. You could have a look at Daily Mail or the Daily Mirror website, or you could think of your own story. And I'd like you just to write a couple of news stories that you find that are more positive, that are more happy, things that people are celebrating, things that people are happy about, people posting sort of stories that are more friendly. You might want to look at the BBC Newsbeat website and see if there's anything on there. So I'd like you just to put in your folder either a screenshot of a newspaper story that you found that is more positive, or I'd like you to write a story about something that's happening around you that is more upbeat and happy, or that you think is a much more positive news story rather than just talking about coronavirus the whole time. So I'm going to ask you to pause right now and do that. Great. So, what is news really? We've talked about fake news in the last lesson, but what really is news? Well, it is the mixture of telling a story, finding the reasoning or the meaning behind that, and then adding facts in to back up your story. It's always something that would interest the audience you're talking to. So remember, when we're looking at your magazine articles, we're thinking of a young teen audience. And it's something that makes them want to carry on reading or carry on buying your newspaper or your magazine. So let's think about who reads the news or where the news comes from. 84% of 16 to 34-year-olds get their news from websites and social media. 30% of the same audience get their demographic watch from TV news, and 12% get them from newspapers. Okay, many people say that actually the news on the TV and newspapers are not targeted to a younger audience. It's much more for an older audience. So that's why we need you guys to help us make it much better and more accessible for them. So this is your first task. I would like you to do a little bit of research, okay? And you need to make a document in your folder of home learning. I'd like you to explore 2, maybe 3 different news platforms, okay? One of them needs to be a newspaper, so it could be the Daily Mail newspaper, it could be the Sun newspaper, it could be the Daily Mirror, it could be the Guardian. Have a look at those, okay? I'd also like you to look at other options, so whether it's Snapchat or Sky News or what's on the BBC website or Newsround. I want you to think about what are the news stories that are the main focus, not just coronavirus, what else is focused on there? How many images or videos are shared on those articles? Which of the places has more pictures? Which of the places have more writing? Is it quite simplistic? Is it more chatty? Do they use slang in what they do? Or is it very formal and lots of complicated words that we don't understand? Is there a bit of a gossip or a celebrity focus? Is it about love affairs or scandal? Do the stories seem a bit one-sided and biased? Are any facts or statistics shared? And who do you think is a target audience? So, based on the article, do you think it's for a young audience, an older audience? Is it for females, males, everyone? Is it perhaps showing a certain way of thinking? And what do you think works well in that article and how could it be improved? I'd like you to spend about 30 minutes on this task. So you're going to need to pause the video right here, use the different points and make sure you respond to it. Take about 30 minutes to an hour just to make sure that you're really thorough and get that work into your folder. Well done on completing the task so far. So let's just have a little bit explaining to do with audience demographics. So, you might have seen newspapers that have a very simple red top at the top. You've heard of the Sun. Other ones that could be on this are like the Daily Mirror, the Daily Sport. Red tops, back in the olden days, were called red tops because they were full of gossip, lots of simplistic language so that everyone can read it, mostly using images, and have celebrity news. We know that it's a majority of a male audience that reads these newspapers, and they come from a working class to a skilled working class and minority of middle class background. And we know it's a slightly younger audience here, 18 to 35. This is in comparison to The Guardian or The Telegraph, and these are called broadsheets. Now, the reason they're called broadsheets because back in the olden days, you'd see people that had a bit more money and a bit more intellect reading these, and they were gigantic newspapers. You'd need to have really long arms to be able to have these wide open and read them from page to page. They had more focus on stories that are political, education, health, the world, and they use lots of complex language and a lot less pictures than the red tops. They were called broadsheets because they were broad, but in these days they are much more compact and smaller size, so you can read them on the train and not elbow someone whilst you're reading them. We do find that it's a much more mixed gender of readers that read these, but it's an older generation, so 30 to 65, and a much more middle class, upper class tend to read it. Typically, they're aimed at people that went to university or are at university because they are using more complex language. Social media, as you know, Snapchat, Instagram, Twitter all have their own news coverage, and they use much more visual stuff. So they use multimedia, that means videos, pictures, and they use a lot shorter sentences to try and grab the audience's attention. They are much more focused on celebrities or gossip, and the audience is 15 to 35 with mixed gender, although we do see much more females watching these stories or talking and responding to them. We find that it's a mix of skilled working class, middle class, and the minority of upper class that are looking at these. Finally, a public broadcast, which you might find on the BBC, is meant to convey balanced views with an eclectic mix of topics. And it's made for a mass audience, so that means to the biggest audience possible, so it needs to suit their needs. So a mass audience means mixed genders, mixed ages, mixed backgrounds, and hopefully their news stories will represent that massive audience that they're tailoring it to. So there might be more news stories to be for parents and others that are done for young adults, etc. So I want you to think about your audience now. Think about your magazine. Who is your specific audience? Is it a mass audience? And so you want to appeal to everyone who likes pop music, grunge music, they like sports, they like cooking. It's everyone. And of course, then you need to think about the age group. And is it all genders? What kind of hobbies or interests or events might they be interested in? Think about what do you like? What would entice you to read more in a magazine? What would engage you? I'd like you to either make a mood board thinking of all these, adding pictures, or you can write a written summary answering those questions. Who's your audience? What kind of hobbies and interests are they into? And what topics will entice and engage that audience? Think about yourself and what you would like. Okay, let's watch a video.
New broadcasting house in London. Now, this is what you normally see when you watch television news. But let me tell you, behind the scenes, BBC journalists are busy working out what should be in the news and where to find it. And that's what you need to do too. Journalists find their news stories from many different places, and we call them sources. Remember, there are things happening around you all the time, and any of those things might make a good story. So you have to be curious, look around you, listen, ask questions, talk to people, find out what's going on. Be persistent. Don't give up after a few questions. What surprises you? What shocks you? What interests you? And how do you know if it's true? It's a big question. One important source, believe it or not, is other journalists. BBC journalists always read the newspapers, they check the news websites, they listen to or watch the news that's done by other journalists. Another place our stories come from is directly from the audience, viewers and listeners, talking to us, telling us about the things going on in their lives. Lots of people get in touch with the BBC by text, email, by blogging, by using social media like Twitter or Facebook and other things too. What people tell us can become an important part of a story, or indeed a story in its own right. But, big but, you still need to check the facts. You might get tip-offs from your friends or family or teachers. What about asking for your friends or fellow students' opinions in the issues in your stories? Just like we do, you can include those views in your report. News or press releases, there we go, that's another good source for you. Organisations contact the BBC with ideas for news stories all the time. They send us information about events that are coming up, or indeed things they've done. And they also put them on their websites, so you need to look at those websites very closely. Journalists also talk to experts on a whole range of subjects and pick up stories from them. They might be politicians, they might be football managers, they might be scientists or doctors or store managers or hairdressers, musicians, head teachers, the list goes on. All of these people are what we call contacts, and they can be friends and neighbours too. And a good reporter has lots of contacts, keeps up with the contacts. Finally, we get some of our best news stories from witnesses. That's to say, people who are on the spot when something happens, and they can tell us all about it. One note of caution: always be careful. It's important to check all the sources. They might not be giving you the full picture, or they might have made, an innocent mistake. So you need to be careful. Only use those sources that you trust. Are they likely to have accurate information on the story? How much checking do you need to do? Depends on the type of source, but it's usually a good idea to check the information with at least 2 different sources. That's our policy. So we have truth and accuracy, 2 of the BBC's basic news values. The audience need to trust you, and that depends on you being accurate. They're important values, and they'll help you become not just a reporter, but a trusted school reporter. One more important bit of advice: to protect people under the age of 18, you must only use their first names in reports. Never use surnames, okay? That's a good policy too. So good luck finding the news stories, have fun, and we'll talk again.
Okay, so we're going to carry on being young reporters. What I'd like you to do is to download the latest interview from rap artist Pengman, and this is verbatim, so it's an interview and it is the transcript from it. A transcript means that someone has sat down and typed up what he said on an audio recording, and verbatim means it's exactly what has come out of his mouth. Then as a reporter, you can then use that to write your own stories, as long as you're using quotes in what you're doing. So I want you to identify what news stories could be explored. Are there any local stories, any educational or environmental, any promotional, music, technology, anything to do with finance, beauty, national, sport? Think about what you could do based on this interview, and what stories could they be about? What could you write your story about? I then also want you to think about what other sources would you need to explore to make sure you get the facts to strengthen your story more. For example, an interview with David Beckham's son may have hinted his dad was getting back into UK football and the England team. But sources to verify and develop this story could be looking at David Beckham's Twitter, maybe contacting David's agent, looking at other journalist items, looking at UK football forums and speaking to fans of Beckham and getting their reactions. So I'd like you to use Pengman and then start exploring different stories and angles you could go with. And then number 3 is to write a list of the different things you could look at in terms of sources to get the facts and strengthen your story more. Okay, you're going to probably need about 30 minutes to an hour to do this. So pause the video and get on. Once you've done all that, make sure all of your work is in your folder and make sure you're sharing it with your right teacher. So if it's for me, it's I'm not Miss Costigan, it's for Miss Samuels, so it's lsamuels@netherhallschool.org or lsamuels@netherhall.org with my little emoji on there. If you're sending the work to Miss Costigan, it's tcostigan@netherhall.org and send that over. Thank you. That's the end of lesson number 2.